till 71, the delimitation was going on properly.
Mhm.
And it was not an issue at all because it was happening almost automatically.
Mhm.
Small changes are required, that's all. It's a kind of a tinkering to do it. In 1975, the 70s in general, was a period of considerable political turmoil in India,
Mhm. Emergency.
even prior to the emergency. Don't forget that by 1969, when the threat to Mrs. Gandhi's government came,
Mhm.
she split the Congress. 1967 was the first time when a number of non-Congress parties assumed power in the state assemblies. The so-called Samyukta Vidayak Dal of Karpuri Thakur and the beginning of caste politics, for example,
In the Ganga belt.
mostly in that area.
Mhm.
It started. And there was the controversial presidential election between Sanjeev Reddy and V.V. Giri,
Mhm.
voting according to your conscience. So the 1971 general election, Mrs. Gandhi made it almost a sort of referendum on herself.
Mhm.
And with that, she basically eliminated the old syndicate, or what used to be called Congress O.
It essentially became her own
Became Congress I or Congi. So it then started bearing absolutely no relationship to the old Indian National Congress, which won us our freedom. So I view the Congress that won our freedom as completely different from the Congi of today.
So would you trace it back to mid 1970s as a
Late 60s, early 70s is when I would say. And still, Mrs. Gandhi felt a considerable amount of disquiet
Mhm.
about her own political stability. And definitely regionalism was coming up. Don't forget, it was 69 when the DMK came to power in Tamil Nadu.
Mhm.
So the rise of regionalism can be really traced to the late 60s, early 70s. So this monolithic behemoth Congress running the whole country, those days gradually started getting over. So it was no more, the Congress had presence in the center, but certainly by and large not in some of the states in the peripheral areas.
But what actually happened in 1980s that led to the freezing of
No, the delimitation freeze happened in 75. So what Mrs. Gandhi did was she felt enough danger to her political position with the rise of the regional parties.
Okay.
And she felt that the limits of the constituencies as they were in 71 were suiting her political purpose.
that was advantageous to her.
It was highly advantageous to her. So, in the midst of that 42nd Amendment, with the height of the emergency, with all the opposition in jail, she froze the delimitation for 25 years. So, she said for 25 years, no constituency will change its boundaries.
So did I get it right? It was an amendment passed during the emergency
Absolutely.
that froze the delimitation for 25 years,
Absolutely.
which would have happened as a matter of course every 10 years otherwise.
Even less than that. I think every 5 years, in fact, there was no particular time limit for these delimitations. They used to happen all the time. Even at the level of a by-election or something like this, it's a matter of, half a district going here, there. Because sometimes the population changes also were not very big.
But the question arises that why did the coalition, Janata Coalition that, displaced Indira Gandhi briefly, why didn't they try to, take this out? And why was it?
This is a good question. They did not do many things which they could have done, probably because their time in office was so short. I think the whole trauma of the emergency and getting rid of Mrs. Gandhi and all that was a kind of a catharsis moment for the country. Because I remember I was shortly, it was after I came back from the US after my studies, that the whole Janata period was highly uncertain and settled. Even the Janata people were uncomfortable dealing with each other because they came together with the purpose of removing the emergency. They had done that. For example, it is often asked, why did they not remove the words secular and socialist, which Mrs. Gandhi
True.
put in the same 42nd Amendment in the bill?
True.
The answer to that is very simple. They had no objection to removing the word secular, but they did not want to remove the word socialist.
Everybody was a committed socialist.
Everybody was a committed socialist. And so what happened was, they feared questions that why are you removing only secular? So they didn't touch anything. And I would feel, it's okay, wisdom in hindsight. Probably they felt that since they had won the election, those constituency limits were still, and I don't think you can unfreeze a limit after the 25 years is set. I think it is something constitutional, because it was set to go till 2001, and I think special majority or something is needed. It's not so easy to change that. Let us fast forward to 2001. 2001 was the Vajpayee government. They froze it again for another 25 years. And here the reason was different. They were in a shaky coalition. And it was not very clear. They were also dependent on regional parties. The regional parties want their own constituencies, because each constituency has got a person who is elected from there, who has maintained a special interest in that area. So he wouldn't like to see this and that changing, especially if some caste composition or religious composition, if some small thing changes, then his electability itself comes to question. So for a purely electoral reason and a selfish short-term reason, none of the coalition partners were particularly keen on removing the delimitation, so it went on for another 25 years, which will get over in 2026, by which time the severe distortions in the population have taken place. So instead of solving this delimitation problem in several small doses, when none of us would have even felt that there is anything happening, after 50 years freeze, we see tremendous disparity in the number of people who are electing a single member to the Lok Sabha. Therefore, this whole principle of each vote, same value, now is practically meaningless.